Hi, my name is Katie Schuler. I'm a marketing program specialist here at Time4Learning. I'm also a longtime homeschooling mom. My oldest son, Bailey, used Time4Learning from second grade all the way through high school, and he graduated from our homeschool in 2017. My youngest son, Braden, has been thriving with Time4Learning since preschool, and he's currently in 11th grade. Today, we have Jamie Gaddy joining us. Jamie's the editor-in-chief at homeschool.com and a longtime homeschooling mom of 6. If you enjoy this interview, please subscribe to our channel and like us on social media to see more fun episodes of Tales from the Homeschool Front. Hi, thanks so much for joining us, Jamie. It's nice for you to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. If you could just give a brief introduction for our audience, please.
Sure. I'm Jamie Gaddy, and I'm a homeschool mom. I've been homeschooling now for about, 15, 16 years. And I'm editor over at homeschool.com.
Nice. Wow. 15 years. It's a long time. I feel like I've 2005 is when I started. So sometimes it feels like it's not been long at all. And then sometimes it feels like it's been forever. Mm-hmm. So interestingly enough, you have a background in education. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Absolutely. So as a child, I always wanted to be a teacher. And so I played being Little Miss Teacher. And of course, once I graduated, I went on to college. I received my bachelor's degree in elementary education. And so I jumped into a teaching profession and taught everything from preschool through junior high school for about 8 years. And I noticed that a lot of my fellow teachers struggled with foundational teaching skills. And so that kind of gave me a heart to help them. And so I went back and got my master's and my doctorate and went back and became a principal and started training teachers and helping them with some of those skills that they struggled with. So that's my
awesome
story.
So to go through that kind of journey in your own, personal life, professional life, and then you made the decision to homeschool. So let's talk a little bit about that. How many children do you have?
I have 6 wonderful children.
And they've all been homeschooled?
They have, actually. And so our homeschool journey sort of began with the first one. And what happened was that about 4th grade, and up until that time, they did all go to the school where I was a principal. But when the oldest was in 4th grade, she began to be bullied. And it's terrible. I was the principal of the school and could not catch the bully in action. And so, it's a kind of a common situation. And in today's world, you have to document everything. So we couldn't take a move on expulsion without having clear documentation of what was going on. So my daughter was crying. She didn't want to go to school. She hated it, and so it wasn't long before we made that decision. Okay, this is enough. I'm going to homeschool. And so that was the beginning of our 15, 16-year stretch here. So
your oldest, were they the only ones in school? You said some of them had been in school up to that point at the school that you were a principal at. But so you have some who have a little bit of public school experience in their memory, but that would mean that you have some also who have never been to school in a public school setting?
Yes, absolutely. So at the time we started homeschooling, we had 4 children. And so those first 4 did attend. Obviously the oldest a little more. The youngest 2 were in pre-K. So they just have that 1 year experience. But then we had 2 more children and those 2 have never been in school.
So I find it fascinating as a longtime homeschooler to talk to not just other parents and homeschoolers, but educators like yourself. So can you tell us a little bit about the transition how was that when you decided, okay, look, this isn't working. I'm going to need to pull you home. Not only what was that transition like in your home life, but how did you reconcile that with still being a principal and an educator? Did you have parents who are like, well, if you're homeschooling, is the school good enough for mine? Did you have any of that kind of conflict that you had to really work out?
Yeah, absolutely. There was some of that, especially at the beginning, because we did it mid-year, which then that kind of throws up all kinds of little flashing lights to everybody around you. So yes, we did have that at the beginning. There were questions. There was, really, what are you doing? So we went with that kind of hybrid, me involved in education, the kids homeschooling. We even had some days where my oldest daughter would bring some of her homeschool work to school with me, so it was kind of an awkward situation. And so eventually I just decided that's enough. I'm going to stay home. I'm going to quit this profession that I've established and just be home with my children. And so it was interesting how that journey transpired. It wasn't long after that I was able to find a way to work while I was at home, and homeschool my children. So obviously that's where homeschool.com came in and some other situations. So
That's really exciting. So I know that I don't have like data for it, but I know statistically there are a large number of educators that choose to homeschool. So speaking maybe from those who you know professionally, but also from your personal experience, why do you think educators make such good homeschoolers? And how do you feel like, even though education is not as one-on-one as we'd all like it to be, how do you feel like your background in education helped you to be a stronger homeschooler? Or did it? Was it so drastically different, that one-on-one? Do you feel like your background prepared you at all? Was it helpful? How was that for you?
Well, I think there's a little bit on both sides of that. I feel like it did help, and I feel like in a few ways it hindered me. So let's talk about the bad news. When we first started homeschooling, I had the mindset that I needed to have a classroom at home. And so that is what hindered me. And so I had it arranged just like a classroom, of course, with four at the beginning. They all had their own little desks. Mama had a desk. We had a chalkboard. We had a bookshelf. It was just like it mirrored my class that I had. And that makes sense because that's what I knew at the time. But it wasn't long before I began to figure out that really does not work in a homeschool setting because, of course, as I told you, we had 2 more children and baby number 5 came along and there was interruptions and, I needed to do this, it was just crazy. And so I began rethinking what I was doing, trying to figure out something that worked for our specific family's needs. And so that's what I would share with other homeschoolers. If they're listening and you're struggling with that, find what works for you. Don't try to be like traditional school or be like some other wonderful homeschool mom that you know. Just figure out what works for you. And I finally did. And then, the fact that I had teaching training, obviously that's going to play into being helpful, when you're trying to teach your child how to read and you run into some issues or struggles with this or that, those skills that you've learned are obviously going to be helpful, that you can draw on that knowledge and you can bring it into your homeschool. So it kind of cut both ways.
Yeah.
When we started.
I love that you mentioned finding what works for you. There are a number of families who I would absolutely say a classroom at home is perfect. Their kids, engage, they see all of the measures of success in that kind of setup. But yeah, it took us years. I have 2 and they're 5 years apart. So when I started homeschooling my oldest, I had a 1-year-old. So trying to get nap time and lunchtime and snack time, kids, they eat multiple times a day. These are things that they don't prepare you for. And, just all of these interruptions, like you mentioned, and, it would be such a hard break in the day. And we also started with the classroom at home. We had not intended to homeschool. So trying to recreate that. And then over time, I would say a good 2 years, you recognizing that we can have a space, that's fine. And that works for many days. But those days where we need to allow them to do on the sofa or in the car or outside or at the dining room table, because they won't stop snacking. This the school where you eat, it'll be fine. So I love that you mentioned that, and finding, a system and a setup at home. So one of the things I know that you and I have been faced with this question multiple times as homeschoolers, but it's one of the things that still comes up all the time, every day. There are so many misconceptions about homeschooling. My kids won't interact with people enough. They won't be social. I won't be able to teach them what they have to know. So what are some of the misconceptions like that you faced about homeschooling, and how did you kind of approach that with your own children? And did your background in education help at all? Like sometimes, like you probably have a much better understanding of the socialization that goes on in a classroom than I think the average parent, because you were witness to it. It's not as much as one would think, given the fear that kind of goes around that particular topic. So other misconceptions, or that one, do you feel like being an educator played a role in how you kind of busted those myths and misconceptions?
I would think to some degree. I mean, I think every homeschool family has heard the whole socialization. Somebody's complained about it to them at least one time in their homeschooling adventure. So, that's something we all hear, and something that never really bothered me. I mean, I don't know if it was our demographic per se that also gave me confidence. 6 kids, there's a lot of socialization going on. Then the aspects that, we do stuff. We go to the library. They were all involved in a rec league, our local little rec league. They played softball, soccer, different things, and then of course we had a church youth group. They were involved in that. So there were so many outlets, and really so many things that we did and were busy with. It never crossed my mind. And I feel like it's a more well-rounded socialization instead of just a large number of children their same age.
Yes, it's outside of their peer group. And that's so you don't, if you're brought up in a school system and you start with your kids in a school system, it's completely understandable to think that peer group is so incredibly necessary. And it is to a degree, but not 25 or 30 kids in your peer group. So yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly that well-rounded, conversations, genuine, meaningful interactions with people from age 4 to 84, and that's cool. Now, the pandemic, of course, that didn't help that socialization issue. That's one of the things. I don't know if you've seen that over on homeschool.com and in your community and your circles, but I spent a lot of time the last 15 months trying to encourage those people who found their way to homeschooling that this is not 2020 is not what homeschooling is like. I mean, we're not isolated all the time. We're not cut off from museums and field trips. So is that something that you found yourself both personally and professionally trying to encourage those who have found homeschooling recently? Just hang in there. You're going to have all of these opportunities available to you.
Right. It makes it a whole different world. It's here you are as a new homeschooler in the middle of a pandemic, and you're stuck at home. And so a lot of them just really didn't have the richness of experiences that typically accompanies a homeschooler life. So yes, definitely. And just like, hang on, you'll find out how wonderful this is when everything starts opening up.
Yes, everything is going to open.
Yeah. I also hear from a lot of parents that they just feel like it might be too difficult. That's another misconception, or that they have to have formal training, or, another one misconception, homeschoolers are weird. Yeah, I know, right? That can go both ways. So my brother-in-law, that was always his thing. He said when he was younger, he thought homeschoolers were so weird. My kids will never homeschool, he said. And then he started seeing mine reach teenagehood, and they were like so totally cool. He was like, wow, I think maybe they could homeschool. So, and now they actually are homeschooling their children too.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. We get that a lot. And then, it's one of those things that I laugh about, because if people meet me and they meet my kids, we may not go a long way to breaking that myth about being weird, but it's a good weird. It's a wide range of interests weird. It's not, but I want to come back around really quickly to that they think it's too difficult to homeschool. So I know I've spent a large portion of my homeschooling journey trying to encourage people in a way that you don't have to teach every subject that your child needs to know. It's my job to facilitate their education. That doesn't mean that I have to teach them everything. So for that, do you, like, even with a background in education, such a strong background, are there still subjects where you're like, okay, so this is not in my special area or my special skill set, so I'm going to find a course or instruction to help you with this? Do you find that that's still something that you've done in your homeschool journey?
Yes, absolutely. So if it's too difficult, I outsource. You know, there's so many options for that. You have co-ops or even online classes. I mean, there's a wealth of a variety of ways to address that online. Whether it's one-on-one teaching through like Skype or Zoom or online curriculum. So yes, definitely. There's really no reason why a parent should feel that homeschooling is too difficult.
And I kind of knew what your answer was going to be going into that, because it's an answer that is so similar to so many other homeschooling parents. But I wanted you, with your background, to be able to tell people who are listening today, even with my degrees, even with the doctorate, there are courses that I outsource, and there's no shame in that. And it's completely normal to accept that responsibility of outsourcing rather than accepting that responsibility of teaching. So like I said, I knew kind of where you were going to go, but I thought it was just so important for you to be able to, share that, because it is encouraging. And so we're going to actually switch from the education background. So I have two kids, two boys. They're 21 and 16. And I have talked to a lot of parents in our Tales series recently, and most of them have one or two children. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about what it's like to homeschool a large family. I mean, I think 6 kids would qualify as a large family these days, but not like obnoxious, but definitely a few more than what a lot of homeschoolers are trying, how they're trying to make that, their schedules work and balancing multiple grade levels. So what are some of your top tips for homeschooling multiple children?
Oh yeah,
Please.
I've got a few that I love to share. The first one, I think I kind of already sort of mentioned, is that routine. Find a way. I don't even like to use the word schedule, because sometimes, at least for me, when I try to schedule, I felt like a failure, because I never could live up to that schedule. It was always, I missed this, I couldn't do that, or I had to change this because somebody's throwing up, or, it didn't work. And I didn't want to feel like a failure. So we just did a routine, and I never put times on it. It was just kind of like a list, a to-do list. When we got up and we finished breakfast, we would start on it. And so that really helped us just kind of leave it open-ended. Nobody felt like a failure. We worked through it. Just figuring out, again, what works for your family. Maybe you are very schedule oriented and that works well for you, then go with it, right? Yeah. So find out what works for you and take time to do it. Don't be afraid if, you start on something and it just isn't working. Change. Don't think you have to stick with something just because, well, I've written up my lesson plans this year, so I got to stick and be miserable. No.
Yes, exactly. That is, that's an absolute description of what happened to me prior to finding Time4Learning. I thought, well, I had to have all of these, I had to lesson plan, I had to have teachers' manuals, and I had to put all this time into it, and it wasn't working. I recognized very early on that it wasn't working, but I spent months forcing it because I thought, one, I should be able to do this. And if I can't do this, then am I really going to be responsible for teaching my kids? But two, there was that financial commitment that we made. We had bought this entire box curriculum for an entire grade level across all subjects, several $100s. And I thought, well, even if I wanted to change and I wasn't afraid of having to admit that I quit this particular product, how can we afford another complete grade level again? So yeah, I mean that's common. I mean, you're gonna have changes, you're gonna have to, trial and error and stuff like that. So I love that you mentioned that.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever have an occasion where you could combine subjects? So like you'd have more than one, or maybe even all of your kids working on a topic or a subject at one time?
Yes, that was actually another one of my tips. So a second tip that I would share is to find a curriculum that works for you. And with that, that was my first suggestion would be something online. And this is actually how I came to know Time4Learning, was when I finally became brave enough to part ways with my traditional education mindset. I wanted to find something that my older children could do while I did a few things with the littles. And so that's kind of another tip in itself right there. Work with the little people first, and then they can go play. And then you can work with the older children and actually think about pre-algebra and, without screaming. So we found Time4Learning, and that worked to really allow the older kids to do something while I finished with the younger kids. And then we did other subjects together, but online curriculum and then doing things together. We always did Bible, art, science, and history all together. And then I would give like more in-depth assignments to the older children. And they would have to write papers or do different projects to kind of give that depth and richness to the lesson that I gave them. But yeah, it was super fun doing that because we were all together, and we did wonderful things. Like in history, we were studying the Revolutionary War period. We made our own candles, the beeswax dipping thing. Yeah, we did wonderful.
That's so exciting.
So doing things with all the children at once really has a lot of benefits.
Yeah, even mine too. I mean, it took me a while to realize that I could make that work, kind of an introduction of the topic for the younger one, and then, like you said, expand for the older. But it was fun. We would use field trips as a definite opportunity to combine. I'm in Florida now, but we did the bulk of our homeschooling just outside Atlanta. So there are just there's an incredible amount of resources and history in Atlanta and the surrounding areas. So we would definitely pick a topic in history or an event in history. And most of the time we could find something in a drivable distance in the state of Georgia where we could go and explore, in depth, but there. So we would do that too.
Super fun.
So this is something that I think that you and I can relate. A lot of the parents that I've spoken with recently, they're newer to homeschooling. Some of them came because of the pandemic. Some of them had been considering it even before, but that was kind of like a really good nudge for them. So it wasn't like they were completely scrambling. But one of the things that I really had to work hard to personally kind of come to terms with in March of 2020 was my lack of impact, the educational impact that the pandemic brought on my family. So, and I would imagine that you could probably relate to that too. While our hearts were aching for the kids who were so impacted, we were kind of at home carrying on business as usual to a degree. So how did homeschooling, long before the pandemic, do you feel like that maybe kind of prepared you in a way for the changes that year brought? Not that anyone could have been prepared, but as a homeschooler, we've kind of built our life around roll with the changes and roll with what the day brings you. So do you feel like homeschooling for a long time played a role in how your family kind of processed and went through that initial part of 2020?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, just like you said, I mean, we're homeschoolers in general are very flexible. I mean, that's kind of the name of the game, right?
Right.
You just roll with it. And a lot of reasons why we homeschool is so we can roll with things and life changes and, all the crazy chaos that is life. And so, yeah, I believe exactly like you said that, the pandemic hit, it really, besides us having to stay home more and not seeing family and friends like we did before, it was very much business as usual.
And it was,
I'm
how
sorry.
did your kids? No, I was going to say, like, did your children have any kind of insight? Were they aware of, obviously your older ones, but I know that you have a range of ages. So were they really able to grasp the almost lack of impact that they had? Like, were they aware of what was going on with the school closures? And as kids went into summer and not knowing what the fall was going to hold, were they kind of more or less grateful to be homeschooling at that point? It's not something that they dealt with.
Well, my older ones were actually in college, and it was really kind of neat because this is a good example of this roll with the changes thing. Obviously a lot of their classes went online, and their friends at college were like, "Oh my goodness, I hate online. This is going to be terrible. I'm going to fail." And they're like, "Yeah, whatever." It was just kind of, "Oh yeah, I'm used to this. It's a change. It's okay. We'll be fine." And so they did well and adapted to all of those changes that came with it. And something interesting, I noticed that we were involved in a couple different colleges, but they were sending out texts every month. I think it was to monitor the students' mental health. And they were like, "How do you find these changes? Are they difficult? Are they bothering you? Are you losing sleep?" And my kids are like, "What?" You know? It's
Yeah, I mean,
all good.
it was such a weird frame of mind, and I know I've spoken before. It was odd to weigh that guilt that I had for not being impacted with that gratefulness that I had of not being impacted. But I'm glad to hear kids are so resilient, and I think they roll with changes far easier than most adults do. So I'm glad that your kids were able to, even the ones in college, adapt, and that's one of the things. So it's good to hear. Coming back to curriculum, you had mentioned that you use Time4Learning. Is there a favorite feature or a function of an online platform like Time4Learning that helps you, kind of relieves a little bit of your stress in planning and provides you with something that's fun for the kids?
Yes, definitely. I would have to say the automated grading. Because, when we don't use Time4Learning, the grading, I mean, I could pan my camera right now and show you a huge stack of papers that I've still not graded from this past spring.
Oh, goodness.
Shame. But yeah, the grading is absolutely a lifesaver for me, especially when you have, 6 children and you're going through 6 different subjects,
Sure.
grade levels for each subject. It's a huge, vast amount of paperwork. And so using an online curriculum that does the grading for you, and even like the planning part, that was also super helpful because I could go in and plan what they needed to do and even make assignments that automated things. And then I wasn't having to put them in their planner and all of that crazy stuff. So yes, huge amount of time saved right there.
So benefit for mom and dad if he has a role. But so what about the kids? So it sounds like you use a solid mix of resources, online and maybe like traditional textbook and workbooks. Is that true? Yeah. So do your kids
Yes.
appreciate having if any kind of, when they do get online, do they appreciate that break from the textbook? Are they tech savvy? Do they appreciate all of the benefits and fun that comes with technology?
Oh yeah. My kids always tend to enjoy like a competition. So if there's something involved in the online curriculum that has a competition element, that's always a winner. They also like to see progress. And so, if we're talking about Time4Learning, I know one aspect that was a huge win for my son was being able to look at what his assignments were for the week and just check, like kind of checking them off. Okay, I did that today, that today. He could see his progress at a glance and know he only had, this much left before he was finished, or he could do all of it in one day and be done for the week. That kind of mentality was really huge for them. They loved that.
Nice. That's something great to point out. We all like to see the finish line, so to speak. So being able to kind of gauge, and homeschoolers, if you don't have a set schedule, we never had a, 8 to noon or 9 to 4. We never had a schedule. So if they would get started during the day, it could be a little daunting to not know when their day would end. We do a number of activities or a number of subjects per day versus a set amount of time. So I like that you mentioned the progress tracking. My final question, and it's one that I like to ask everyone. So, I'm really interested to see what you say as a longtime homeschooler. In one word, what does homeschooling mean to you? And then can you elaborate on that?
How can I pick just one word?
That's why I was excited to hear what you had to say. I know for a lot of homeschoolers, especially the new ones, of course, the freedom and the flexibility, and those are unbelievably important to me still today, 97 years later. But if you could pick one word of what homeschooling means for you or for your family, what would it be?
Of course, I would include those if I could use more than one word. But one word, I would say individuality. That I could make our homeschooler, each of my 6 children's education, completely individual and unique to fit their needs. So
I love that. Thank you so much for being with us again today, Jamie. It was great to talk to you. I really appreciate you sharing not just your background, but your insights. I mean, every little bit that we can provide to homeschoolers, both veteran, experienced homeschoolers and new ones. It's so important, that just sheer volume of families that are turning to homeschooling now. It's drastically different than when I started homeschooling in 2005. I worked so hard to find other homeschoolers and resources, and to be able to have a role professionally in helping them now is pretty incredible. So I appreciate the time that you spent to help me encourage others too.
Oh, absolutely. I enjoyed it. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks. Have a great day. That's it for today's episode. If you're interested in learning more about our homeschooling program, please visit time4learning.com or email me at the address on the screen. We're happy to connect you with a wealth of information like videos, resources, and blog articles. Until next time.